She has no place in the carol. Then let her sing alone.
She has no place in the carol, the sheriff said. Then let her sing alone. The rancher answered. Why do you keep going? Ida's voice was flat, tired. They don't want you there. The morning light was cold and thin as Mabel reached for her shawl. Her fingers fumbled with the worn fabric, and she felt her mother's eyes on her back before the words had even finished falling. Mabel didn't turn around. She tucked her carol book under her arm, the pages soft and creased from weeks of practice, and moved toward the door. I know the songs now, Mama. I practiced. That's not the point. Ida's hands were red and raw from the laundry she'd been scrubbing since before dawn. They've made it clear. Why do you keep humiliating yourself? Mabel's throat tightened, but she opened the door anyway. The cold air bit at her face as she stepped outside, and she didn't look back. She never did. The women were already gathered near the town square when she arrived, their breath rising in small clouds as they adjusted scarves and flipped through their books. Mabel stood at the edge, as she always did, holding her book close to her chest like it might protect her from what was coming. She'd been coming for weeks. Every morning, the same cold greetings. The same closed circle. The same whispers that weren't quite whispers. But yesterday had been different. Yesterday, a woman named Lucille Thornhill, a visiting singer from back east, someone who'd trained properly, had pulled her aside after practice. Your voice is too heavy, Lucille had said, not unkindly, but with the certainty of someone who knew she was right. Like your body. It doesn't synchronize with the group. She'd tilted her head, almost sympathetic. Don't come back. It's kinder this way. Mabel had left without a word. But this morning, she'd come anyway. Maybe Lucille had been wrong. Maybe it was just one person's opinion. Maybe. Why are you here? Sheriff Gaines stood at the front of the group, arms crossed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The women already knew what to do. They stepped closer together, closing the circle tighter, and Mabel felt herself pushed further back without anyone touching her. I thought, Mabel started, but her voice came out small and uncertain. You heard Miss Thornhill, the sheriff said, his tone flat and final. Your voice is too loud. Too harsh. It disrupts the harmony. He gestured toward the others. We need voices that blend. Not. He didn't finish, but his eyes swept over her body, and the meaning was clear. Someone behind her whispered, loud enough to be heard, her voice is as heavy as she is. A few women laughed, not cruel laughter, just casual, comfortable. The kind that came easy when everyone agreed. Go home, Sheriff Gaines said. Mabel stood there, clutching her carol book. She could feel the tears starting, hot and humiliating, and she blinked hard to keep them back. Everyone was watching. The whole group, the people passing by on the street, the shopkeepers standing in their doorways. Everyone saw. She turned to leave. What's happening here? The voice came from behind her, deep and calm, and Mabel froze. She didn't turn around, but she heard the footsteps, steady, unhurried, and then a man stepped into view. He was tall, dressed in a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat, his face weathered but kind. She didn't know his name, but she knew who he was. Everyone did. Wade Brennan, the rancher who owned half the land outside town. Sheriff Gaines straightened. Just organizing the caroling group, Mr. Brennan. Nothing that concerns. Why isn't she singing? Wade's eyes were on Mabel, on her red face, her shaking hands, the tears she was trying so hard to hide. Her voice doesn't fit, the sheriff said, his tone clipped. Miss Thornhill evaluated her yesterday. Professional opinion. Wade turned to look at Lucille, who stood off to the side with her arms folded. Then he looked back at Mabel. I'd like to hear her. There's no need. I came to town to donate supplies for the Christmas charity, Wade said, his voice still calm but somehow heavier now. But before I do, I want to hear her sing. The sheriff's jaw tightened. The implication hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. If she didn't sing, the donation didn't happen. And the town needed that donation. Sheriff Gaines exhaled sharply. Fine. Sing. Mabel's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped her book. She opened it, but the notes blurred in front of her eyes. What should I? Sing whatever you were practicing, Wade said. She took a breath. Her voice cracked on the first note, thin and unsteady, and she heard someone stifle a laugh. But she kept going. The second line was stronger. The third steadier still. Her voice wasn't trained. It wasn't polished. But it was warm and honest and real, and by the time she reached the end of the verse, the laughter had stopped. Silence. Wade removed his hat. Her voice is perfect, he said. Exactly what Christmas should sound like. Lucille stepped forward, her expression tight. It's not technically. I don't care about technique, Wade said, cutting her off. I care about heart. He turned to the sheriff. If she sings, the donation stays. Sheriff Gaines's face flushed, but he nodded stiffly. Fine. Wade looked at Mabel one last time. I'll be at every caroling event, he said. To make sure. Then he walked away and Mabel stood there, still holding her book, still crying, but now for a different reason entirely. The group dispersed in awkward silence. No one looked at Mabel. They gathered their books and scarves, murmuring to each other in low voices, and within minutes, the square was nearly empty. Mabel stood alone, clutching her carol book, trying to steady her breathing. Her hands were still shaking. Lucille Thornhill leaned close to the sheriff's wife, her voice just loud enough to carry. He embarrassed himself. For her. The sheriff's wife glanced at Mabel with narrowed eyes. She must have done something. Women like that know how to manipulate. Mabel heard every word. She always did. She turned and walked toward home, her head down, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall in public. People stared as she passed, shopkeepers pausing in their doorways, women pulling their children closer as if her presence might somehow taint them. She didn't see Wade Brennan watching from across the street. He stood in the shadow of the general store, his hat pulled low, his expression unreadable. He didn't approach her. That would only make things worse. But he followed at a distance, just far enough back that she wouldn't notice, close enough to make sure she got home safe. He saw where she lived. A small, worn cabin at the very edge of town, set back from the road as if trying to hide. The roof sagged slightly on one side, and the windows were patched with cloth where glass should have been. Wade stopped at the corner, watching as Mabel slipped inside and closed the door behind her. Then he turned and walked back toward town. By evening, the gossip had spread like fire. In the general store, over dinner tables, in quiet conversations outside the church, people whispered about what had happened. About the rancher who'd defended the fat girl. About the donation he'd used as leverage. About what it all meant. Why would he defend her? Someone asked at the mercantile, loud enough for the whole store to hear. What does he see in that fat girl? Another voice added, dripping with disbelief. The sheriff's wife stood near the counter, selecting ribbon for Christmas decorations, and she shook her head slowly. She's probably tricked him somehow. Women like that, they know how to make men feel sorry for them. Lucille Thornhill was there too, examining a bolt of fabric, and she turned at the sound of her name. I tried to help her yesterday, she said, her tone patient and reasonable. I told her the truth, that her voice didn't fit. I thought she'd understand. But instead, she comes back and causes a scene. She didn't cause the scene, the storekeeper muttered, but no one paid him any attention. That night, Lucille visited the sheriff's house. She sat in the parlor with the sheriff's wife, drinking tea and speaking in low, measured tones. We need to make sure this doesn't continue, Lucille said. It's unseemly. A man of his standing, associating with someone like her, it reflects poorly on the whole town. The sheriff's wife nodded. What do you suggest? I'll speak to him, Lucille said. Make him see reason. He's clearly acting out of misplaced charity. Once he understands the position he's putting himself in, he'll step back. And if he doesn't? Lucille smiled, cold and confident. Then we'll make it clear that she's not welcome. Not in the caroling group. Not anywhere. Across town, Mabel sat in the dark cabin, staring at the wall. Her mother had gone to bed hours ago, exhausted from a full day of washing other people's laundry. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers, and the room was growing cold, but Mabel didn't move to add more wood. She just sat there, replaying the morning in her mind. The way the women had stepped away from her. The sheriff's flat, dismissive tone. The laughter. The humiliation. And then, Wade Brennan. The way he'd looked at her. The way he'd spoken. Her voice is perfect. No one had ever said that to her before. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, trying to make herself smaller. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as wrong and broken as everyone said. But she'd learned a long time ago not to hope too much. Hope only made it hurt worse when the truth came crashing back down. Outside, the night was quiet and cold. Snow had started to fall, soft and silent, covering the town in a blanket of white. In the distance, someone was playing a fiddle, a Christmas tune, cheerful and bright. Mabel closed her eyes and listened, and for just a moment, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to belong. Wade Brennan returned to town the next morning with a wagon full of supplies to deliver. He stopped at the general store first, unloading sacks of flour and crates of canned goods for the Christmas charity drive. The storekeeper thanked him, but his eyes were uneasy, and he kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in and overhear. "Shame about yesterday," the storekeeper said finally, his voice low. "You meant well, Mr. Brennan, but that girl—" Wade stopped, a sack of flour still in his hands. "What about her?" The storekeeper shifted uncomfortably. "Just, people are saying things. Might be best to let it go." Wade set the sack down harder than he intended. "What people? What things?" "Nothing mean-spirited," the storekeeper said quickly. "Just concern for you. Miss Thornhill's a professional, and she said the girl's voice doesn't fit. Folks think you might have been, well, too kind. And now the girl might get the wrong idea." Wade's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. There was no point. He finished unloading the supplies in silence and left without another word. By afternoon, he found himself riding toward the edge of town, toward the small cabin he'd seen the day before. He told himself he was just checking to make sure she was all right, that his defense hadn't made things worse for her. But the truth was he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd stood there, holding that carol book like a shield, tears streaming down her face, and sung anyway. He dismounted a few yards from the cabin and approached on foot. The place looked even more worn in daylight, the roof patched with mismatched wood, the door hanging slightly crooked. He was about to knock when he heard voices inside. He stopped, his hand halfway to the door, and listened. "Did they let you sing?" It was an older woman's voice, harsh, tired. Only because someone forced them. That was Mabel. Her voice was thick, like she'd been crying. "I told you many times not to go there." The older woman's tone sharpened. "Why do you never listen?" "Mama," Mabel's voice broke. "Mama, you know it was my childhood dream. To be a singer. But because of how I look, no one would teach me. No one would even let me try. I thought Christmas caroling would be different. I thought that's where everyone could belong. I never knew they'd treat me this way." There was a long pause. Then the older woman spoke again, softer this time. "Dreams don't feed us, Mabel. Come inside. It's cold." Wade stood there, his hands still raised, and felt something tighten in his chest. A childhood dream. She'd carried this hope since she was a child, and they'd crushed it without a second thought. He waited until he heard footsteps move deeper into the cabin, then knocked. The door opened a crack, and a woman peered out. Mabel's mother, he assumed. Her face was lined and suspicious, her hands red and cracked from years of hard work. "Can I help you?" I'd like to speak with your daughter, Wade said. About what? About her voice. The woman's eyes narrowed, but she opened the door wider and stepped aside. Mabel, she called over her shoulder. Someone here for you. Wade stepped inside. The cabin was small and dim, with a single room serving as kitchen, sitting area, and sleeping space all at once. The furniture was worn and mismatched, the blankets thin and patched. Pot of something, soup maybe, simmered on the stove, but the portions would be small. He understood immediately. This wasn't just about her size or her voice. This was about class. About poverty. About a girl who'd never had a chance. Mabel appeared from the corner, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw him, she froze. Mr. Brennan, I'm sorry if I caused trouble yesterday. I shouldn't have. You didn't cause trouble, Wade said quietly. You revealed it. Her hands, which had been twisting together nervously, stilled. She looked up at him, and for the first time, her eyes met his directly. What? They were cruel, Wade said. That's not your fault. She didn't seem to know what to say to that. She looked down again, her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. Wade turned to her mother. I'd like to sponsor your daughter for the Christmas caroling. A new dress. Proper shoes. So she can sing without shame. Ida's expression hardened. We don't take charity. It's not charity, Wade said. It's payment. For bringing something real to Christmas. Something this town forgot. Mabel's voice was barely a whisper. Why would you do this for me? Wade looked at her, really looked at her. At the girl who'd been told her whole life that she didn't belong, that her voice was wrong, that her body was wrong, that her dream was foolish. And he thought about his own mother, who'd loved to sing, who'd filled their home with warmth and music until the day she died. Who would have hated what this town had done to this girl? Because they're wrong, he said. And someone should say it. The seamstress arrived 2 days later with her measuring tape and notebook. Word spread quickly. By evening, half the town knew that Wade Brennan had paid for a dress, a proper dress, for Mabel. The gossip was relentless. He's buying her clothes? Someone whispered at the church social. This has gone too far, Lucille Thornhill said to the sheriff's wife, her voice tight with disapproval. We'll handle it at caroling night. Christmas Eve morning arrived cold and bright. When the dress was delivered to Mabel's cabin, she and her mother stood staring at it for a long time. It wasn't fancy, just a simple dress in deep green wool, clean and new and perfectly fitted. Mabel had never owned anything so fine. Ida touched the fabric gently, then pulled her hand back as if afraid she'd soil it. We should thank him properly, she said quietly. How? Mabel asked. We have nothing. You can bake, Ida said. Make him something. It's tradition to give gifts on Christmas. So Mabel baked. She used the last of their flour and sugar to make a batch of simple Christmas cookies, wrapped them carefully in clean cloth, and tied the bundle with a scrap of ribbon. Her hands shook the entire time. Take it to his ranch, Ida said. Before caroling tonight. Thank him. Mama, I don't even know where. Everyone knows the Brennan Ranch, Ida said firmly. Go. The walk was long. Mabel clutched the wrapped cookies against her chest, her heart pounding harder with every step. The ranch house was bigger than she'd imagined, 2 stories, with a wide porch and real glass windows. She almost turned back 3 times. But finally she climbed the steps and knocked. The door opened. Wade stood there, surprise crossing his face. Mabel? How did you know where I live? Everyone knows where you live, sir, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I brought you something. She held out the bundle. Her hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Wade took it carefully. Come in, he said. It's cold. I shouldn't. Please. She stepped inside, and her breath caught. The house was beautiful, warm, and spacious, with polished wood floors and furniture that looked like it had been made by someone who cared. But it felt empty somehow. Too quiet, Too still. Wade unwrapped the cookies slowly, and when he saw what was inside, his expression softened. You made these? Mama and I, Mabel said. We never give gifts. People don't usually accept from us. But you helped me. We wanted to thank you. Wade picked up one of the cookies and took a bite. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, there was something in his face that made Mabel's chest ache. These are perfect, he said quietly. Really? She couldn't hide her surprise. I thought. Everything you make is dismissed before anyone even tries, Wade said. Just like your voice. She looked up then really looked at him, and their eyes met and held. Something passed between them, something Mabel didn't have words for. Thank you, Wade said, his voice softer now. This is the first Christmas gift I've received in 3 years. Since my mother died, he said. She used to bake like this. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else. Something warm and fragile and new. I'm sorry, Mabel whispered. Don't be, Wade said. You reminded me of something I thought I'd lost. When it was time to leave, Wade insisted on walking her partway home. They walked in comfortable silence, snow crunching softly under their feet. As they neared the edge of town, Wade stopped. Tonight at caroling, he said. Don't be afraid. I'll be there. Why do you keep helping me? Mabel asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because you remind me that good things still exist. And I don't want to forget that. Mabel didn't know what to say. She just nodded and they parted ways. That evening, she walked to the town square in her new green dress. The women stared. Lucille Thornhill's voice carried across the group. A new dress doesn't fix a voice. Mabel's confidence wavered. But then Wade appeared, just as he'd promised. He didn't touch her. He just stood beside her, solid and steady, and said to the group, she'll start the first carol. Lucille opened her mouth to protest, but Wade's silence was louder than any argument. He simply waited. And eventually, Lucille stepped back. Mabel opened her carol book. Her hands were still shaking, but when she started to sing Silent Night, her voice was steady. The others joined in, and townspeople came outside to listen. Children stopped playing. Even the wind seemed to quiet. When the song ended, one man removed his hat. Then another. Women curtsied slightly. It wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement. Wade turned to Sheriff Gaines. She'll sing at every event. Understood? The sheriff nodded stiffly. Lucille tried one last time. Mr. Brennan, surely you see. Wade turned, his expression cold and final. I see perfectly, Miss Thornhill. Good evening. He walked away, and Mabel walked beside him. Christmas morning arrived quietly. Mabel woke in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, still half convinced the night before had been a dream. But the green dress hanging on the peg by the door was real. The memory of Wade standing beside her while she sang was real. The way the townspeople had removed their hats in acknowledgement was real. From across the room, her mother's voice came softly. You sang beautifully. Mabel turned her head, startled. Ida was sitting up in her own bed, her expression softer than Mabel had seen in years. It was the first compliment her mother had ever given her about singing. Mabel felt tears prick her eyes, and she didn't try to stop them. That afternoon, the church held its Christmas service. Mabel arrived with her mother, expecting to sit in the back as they always did. But before the service began, Pastor Williams approached her. Mabel, he said kindly, would you sing for us today? A solo if you're willing. She looked at her mother, who nodded. Then she looked toward the back of the church and saw Wade sitting in the last pew, watching her with steady eyes. He didn't smile or nod. He just waited. And somehow, that was enough. Yes, Mabel said. I'll sing. When she stood at the front of the church and began, "O Holy Night," her voice filled the small space. It still wasn't technically perfect. It still wasn't trained. but it was warm and honest and full of something the town had forgotten, true feeling. Ida sat in the front row with tears streaming down her face. Wade remained in the back, his hat in his hands, his head slightly bowed. When the song ended, people approached her afterward. Some apologized quietly, awkwardly. Others simply nodded, offering wordless acknowledgement. Lucille Thornhill and the sheriff's wife were notably absent. Wade waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. "Walk with me?" he asked. Mabel nodded, and they stepped outside into the cold afternoon. Snow crunched under their feet as they walked slowly down the empty street. "You sang for yourself today," Wade said. "Not for me. Not for them. For you." Mabel considered this. "I was afraid," she admitted. "But then I remembered what you said. That I didn't cause trouble, I revealed it. And now I think maybe my dream wasn't foolish after all." Wade stopped walking and turned to face her. The afternoon light caught the side of his face, softening the hard lines. "I'd like to hear you sing every Christmas," he said. "Not just this one." Mabel's heart stuttered. "Every Christmas? Every Christmas. Every Sunday. Every morning if you'd let me." His meaning was clear. This wasn't just about caroling. This was about something more. "I'd like that," Mabel said, her voice barely audible. "Then may I call on you? Properly?" "Yes." They stood there for a moment longer, the world quiet around them, and then continued walking. Over the following days, Wade came to visit. He brought small gifts, a book of songs, a warm shawl for Ida, firewood for their stove. He walked with Mabel through town, and slowly, grudgingly, the town began to accept what was happening. Lucille Thornhill left quietly one morning, returning east without fanfare. The sheriff and his wife kept their distance. 1 year passed. When the next Christmas arrived, Mabel stood at the front of the caroling group, not because anyone forced them to include her, but because they asked. She wore a ring on her finger now, a simple gold band that caught the lamplight. Her wedding was planned for spring. Ida stood watching from the side, her expression proud and soft in a way it had never been before. Wade stood beside Mabel, not as her protector anymore, but as her partner. Children gathered around, their faces bright with excitement. They loved her voice now. They'd learned to listen. Mabel opened her carol book and started Silent Night. This time, everyone sang with her, not despite her, but because of her. The sound rose together, warm and full, filling the cold night air. After the caroling ended, Wade and Mabel walked home together through the quiet streets. Snow fell softly around them. "Do you remember what you said?" Wade asked. "That you thought Christmas was where everyone could belong?" "I was wrong," Mabel said. "They didn't want me." "No," Wade said gently. "You were right. They just forgot what belonging meant. You reminded them." Mabel leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his steadiness. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was too much or not enough. She just felt like herself. And that was exactly right. She'd learned that some voices are meant to be heard, and some men know how to listen. But more than that, she'd learned that dreams don't die. They just wait for someone to believe in them.